and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by the man known as Spanky Sports on Twitter. Spanky, thank you very much for coming on. Before we get into this episode, make sure you follow us on Twitter, @BettingPod, and check out the website, businessofbetting.com. Guest suggestions are much appreciated. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Proprietary Limited. Betfair operates a betting exchange and is licensed in the Northern Territory of Australia. Residents of Australia can join Betfair by visiting betfair.com.au and support this podcast by using promo code BOBPOD. Please gamble responsibly. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by the man known as Spanky Sports on Twitter. Spanky, thank you very much for coming on.
Appreciate it, Jay. Thanks for having me.
So Spanky, how did you get started in sports betting? Most people will understand pretty quickly that you have an American accent. And so what was your entry into the business, or how did it all begin for you?
Well, growing up, I was always a gambler. My mother taught me, how basic addition and subtraction with playing cards. So I always had gambling in my family. It was just natural for me. In high school, college, I would play poker, read a lot of blackjack books. Once I got of age to be able to go into casinos, I would, play blackjack and play banking, slot machines, and progressive video poker. Anything that had an edge, I was always fascinated with finding a way to beat the house and to try to turn the odds in my favor. When it came to sports, my first introduction ever to sports betting was when I was in high school. I used to run parlay cards for a bookmaker out of Hoboken. And, I saw how much money that was involved in. And I was always like, wow, this guy's like printing money. I was always wondering if I could maybe turn it around and find a way to beat these bookmakers and have the odds in my favor. One day I was sitting in a pizzeria and a basketball game was on, and I was in college at the time in university, and I studied computer science and finance. In my comp sci class, I kind of learned how to download web pages, HTML web pages, and from the web, and I parsed them with Perl, and which is programming languages, and I would use Java to download the pages. And my finance classes, I was learning basic probability, expected value. So kind of thinking maybe I could try to combine these two things and try to find out what, half points are worth. So I purchased data. I kind of crunched some numbers, and I kind of knew learned fast what half points were worth in football and basketball. And I developed software to look for discrepancies in the market. And I started off middling and scalping games. Scalping is the finance for arbitrage in our business. And I was just starting off middling and scalping. And then that's my first start in the business.
There's a lot to unpack there. Take me back to the poker and blackjack days. What was that like? Did you find an edge that you could exploit for a while, or how did that unfold?
Yeah, in the blackjack, in Atlantic City, the Claridge Casino used to have this surrender blackjack game that was pretty good, and I was playing a little bit of that. And again, this is nothing, again, I was just a college student, so I would do it and I was just trying to make a little extra money, a little extra spending cash. But I loved having the odds in my favor. It's just a high where you're not supposed to, you know what I mean? All players that go into a casino don't have the edge for the most part. So I enjoyed that, and with poker, I enjoyed that too. I'm probably break even or even losing poker player, slightly loser, or maybe I'm a big loser in today's market. But back then I was probably a slight loser. But I still enjoyed it. It was fun for me, and I studied the game, and I always wanted to turn the tables in my favor and find a way to win. It came to the sports is where I'm at today. That was back 18 years ago when I was doing all that, 19 years ago. So it's been a long time.
Do you think the experimenting and studying and trying to find an edge in different games has helped you in sports betting?
Yeah, absolutely. Just learning basic probability and finding out what an expected value is, and just all these basic probability classes I took, and it definitely helped me. I learned a lot, and just like anyone else that starts off in gambling, you pay your tuition, you pay your school fees, your dues, and you learn, and you learn by losing. Thank God I didn't have much to lose back then, but I was just a college student. But I learned that bankroll management, money management, and discipline, There was and I read several books. That's one thing. I always read so much, and I've read, there's crappy books and there's great books, and even the crappy books you could take some good stuff out of. There was an author by the name of John Patrick, and he's a lot of the stuff he says is just it's rubbish, but at the same time, he does say a lot of things, bankroll management, money management, discipline, and these things, you try to take nuggets out of everything you read, and that helped me to where I'm at today.
So take us back to New Jersey, 18, 20 years ago, you mentioned. What was the mentality like around potentially having a life in blackjack or sports betting or poker? Was it accepted at all? What would you tell your parents or your mother when you came home and said, I want to do this for a living?
Yeah, up until about 6-7 years ago, my mother asked me, what am I doing with my life? So yeah, it's gambling for a living is completely taboo. Everyone thinks that you're crazy and you don't know what you're doing, and it's hard, and everybody to be accepted by your family, and it was very difficult to do that, and nobody believed it, and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to just go through it. The markets back, the blackjack market, all the best games were not where I'm at. BJ21, Stanford Wong would have these websites where they kind of tell you if you're a black chip member, I think, if I remember correctly, where they would tell you where the best games were. And even then, some of those games, a lot of these guys would never kind of divulge the best games, and I wasn't really looking to travel on the West Coast and go to different places, but I was fascinated. I was a part of that community. I loved it, and I loved reading about it. And again, it was just a side gig for me. It was just something I loved. I read all the major blackjack books. It was just a passion.
Take us to the moment when you took the leap into sports betting. Was that something you prepared for a while and was ready for, or was that something that you sort of tiptoed your way into until you became, full-time at it and doing it for a living?
After leaving university, I started working for Deutsche Bank, and that's when I got this, thing at this pizzeria. I was watching this basketball game, and I said, let me try what I learned in school. Let me try to program this stuff. So I started, using this. I developed software. I analyzed discrepancies in the market, but I still was at my regular job. I wasn't going to quit, and I was doing it at nights and weekends, and I would just, scalp games. Back then, the discrepancies of all these different sports books were just unbelievable, and they lasted for so long. One sports book would have a -3 on a game, another one would have a -5, and that would just sit there for hours. And this was the early 2000, 2001. The internet was still relatively young, I guess, and then sports betting was probably 3, 4, 5 years. It's in infancy stages online, and nobody really looked at anybody else's lines. Don Best was still young then, where you could see a snapshot of all the different lines from all the different sports books. So everything was ripe for the pickings, and it was a great time to come up because you didn't have to be that great. You just had to, in middling, my risk was just so minimal. I didn't risk much at all. There was several different promotions back then, different bonuses. It was insane. Guys would give you 20% to make a deposit, and everything. It was just like, you send them $2,000 and you're sitting there with $2,400 in your account, and you do that to 2 different places, and you find a scalp, you bet the whole thing on one place, bet the other thing, opposite team on another place, and you wind up with $4,800 in one place and 0, and you call up the guy where you lost your money at, and you sound all sad, but in all reality, you're making money, and and then the guy will say, "Oh, I'll give you 25% if you send more money," and it was just that, I wasn't really more of like the bonus hunting type thing. That wasn't my thing, but I still definitely took advantage. I wasn't going to deny bonuses. And it was just a great time. Moving the money around was great. PayPal, you could actually send money to sports books offshore using PayPal for a while. And then NetTeller was the major payment processor back then, where it was just easy to move money from one sports book to another. It was fabulous. Great time to come up in a business.
So what was the community like? Did you have a handful of close friends also doing it? Did you know anyone else doing it at all? Or was this just something that started as more of a hobby that developed, and then at a certain point you were all in on it?
Yeah, it was just definitely, I was doing it on weekends and nights. It was just more of a hobby, but I started making more money as this side gig than I was at my regular job. And that's when I kind of took the leap and said, that's it. I'm going full time. And that's when, my mother would have an uproar. I was just married then, and my wife would say, I was making a good salary. And, everyone was like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? You got a good salary. You went to school. You did all this school and this studying. I got really good grades at school, and you're going to give all this up to be a gambler for a living? Like, are you nuts? And it's hard, there's a lot of negative feedback from everyone. And I just stuck to my guts. I said, listen, the proof's in the pudding. It's not like I'm doing this without having any evidence of it. I'm making money doing this on the side, and I could definitely at least match, if not exceed, what I was doing at my regular job. So I definitely, I took the leap. What you said about if I had colleagues or anything, no, there was nobody around me that was doing it. I had a partner. Him and I went in it together, who worked with me at Deutsche Bank, and we decided to take the leap together. But other than that, there was, nobody else that I knew. I kind of had to meet everybody along the way.
Looking back, were there things that you weren't prepared for or that you wish you knew in advance getting into the sports betting area?
What I was the most prepared for is I knew how to win. You know what I mean? I knew just by middling and scalping. I couldn't have to handicap a thing. I wasn't even into the handicapping back then. I just knew how to look for discrepancies, and I kind of, had my hand on the pulse, knowing exactly why lines were moving and what's happening in the markets and which sports books would have a sharp NBA line, and the sports book that had a sharp NBA line might not have a sharp college basketball line. And, this guy, look out for his NFL lines. He's really good. So you start learning these things. And I would go down to Costa Rica, and I became very friendly with those sports books. A lot of people had this idea of, if this guy's a sports book, at the end of the day, we're trying to take your money, and they're trying to take my money, but we could still be friends, and we could still use each other in a way that makes both of our business positive. I wish that existed today, but we could get into that a little later. But yeah, it was, I'm very friendly today to, all the sports books I met 17 years ago. When I was down in Costa Rica, several of them are still there, and I'm still very friendly with a lot of the main guys there, and they're the best guys, great guys to know, and just good people. We kind of help make both of our businesses stronger. What I was least prepared for, I was naive. I didn't really think that, I thought everybody was just a legitimate company, and these are just .coms, and I didn't realize I could get stiffed. Unregulated market, so there was no oversight. Nobody's looking at it. I can't go to a judge and or file a police report and say betxyz.com didn't pay me and help, and they'll be saying, what the hell are you doing even playing with these guys? You took a few lumps back then, and guys didn't pay, and you kind of did your due diligence then, and you kind of developed a reputation. When I first started, it was all post up. So everything, you'd have to send the money and have the money posted up in sports books. And then soon, one guy took a chance on me and, was sick of paying the net teller fees for me sending money back and forth. So he decided to give me credit. And then soon I kind of parlayed that, and I would tell another guy, hey, listen, this guy's giving me credit. Why don't you give me credit also? So he said, oh, really? And he checked up on me, and that's how my reputation grew. I always paid everybody when I lost, and I had a good name in the business, and I was trying to develop that name. That's what helped me succeed and keep succeeding as the time went on.
So those that weren't holding their reputation up as the most important thing, did they sort of fall away after a while, and they just couldn't function within the ecosystem of what it was like back then?
Yeah, sports books back then, like I said, they would have aggressive bonuses. They would have aggressive promotions. One of the ones that I remember the most was a place called Sports Market / Aces Gold, and they would deal no juice Fridays, where every game was just no juice. It was even money on everything, and on top of that, they would let you buy on or off the NFL 3 for 10 cents, which is
wow.
It's a bargain, So it was crazy. It was just back then, guys were they just wanted the business. They didn't, and they said, hell with it, let's just do it. And they'd take shots, you know what I mean? I remember Aces Gold, that time, it was, I think, 2002, the Super Bowl, and it was St. Louis, New England. I think the spread was 14. And that's kind of the time in which Pinnacle was coming up. And Pinnacle, I remember, dealt a 13.5 on that game, and Aces Gold dealt a 14.5 on that game. And that's the game that, New England was such a heavy dog, 14-point dog. They wound up winning outright, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
That's, soon after that, that's when they went bankrupt, Aces Gold. And, Well, a lot of these guys are promotions. I remember place, just off the top of my head, Carib. There was a place called Carib Sports that dealt 0-2 Tuesdays, where you'd be able to lay 0-2 on every NFL game on Tuesdays. There was 0-5 Fridays in several different places like Bet All World, Top of the World Sports. There was Loose Lines. There's just so many different places, so many guys trying to compete, trying to get that dollar from the consumer here in the United States. And it was just very aggressive, and it got too aggressive. And guys would have to get either they would go bankrupt, get bailed out by another sportsbook, or swallowed up by another sportsbook, and only the best survived.
It sounds fascinating. Did it evolve into a more corporatized, not necessarily professional, but more structured and organized sort of business for a lot of these sportsbooks, or was it run pretty haphazardly? And you mentioned before people were taking shots. Did they become more sophisticated in their operations so that they would never get to a point where they could go bankrupt, or was it really the wild, wild west?
A little bit of both. There were some sports books that really ran it like a tight ship, and they did everything they could. And then there's other guys that just said, hell with it. You know what I mean? There's guys, you knew when somebody, you'd have slow pays. People would start off, you'd request a withdrawal, and they'd delay you. They wouldn't answer your phone calls, and a week would go by, 2 weeks would go by, and you'd know that, oh shit, something's going on here. And then you would just hear, there'd be rumblings, you know what I mean? I kind of, to hear from what other sports books are saying, hey, I wanted to do a transfer to this sports book, and the sports books would say, no, I can't accept a transfer from those guys. We're not doing transfers with them anymore. So that's when you're like, why not? Everything was good a couple of weeks ago. So stuff like that started happening, and then you kind of, it's a lot of the times you got to just be lucky, and you got to hope that you don't have a big balance in a lot of these places when they go belly up. And I had balances in a lot of places. I just didn't have death blows. I lost money in a lot of these sports books that went belly up, but it was never enough I got knocked down. I just wasn't knocked out. So, and that's just luck. I just got lucky there. There's nothing skillful about that, man. It was the Wild West in essence.
Let's talk price. Unlike bookies and toads, the Betfair exchange is a low-margin, buy-sell, fixed-odds marketplace where the value stays with the punter, not the house. Ready for the game within the game? Join betfair.com.au. Gamble responsibly.
So take us through some of your sort of major strengths that help you, get through and have those winning months and winning weeks and winning days, and also some of the weaknesses that you need to, obviously, like everyone else, continue to work on.
Yeah, I think a major strength is knowing every aspect of my business. When I'm the software developer, I'm the bettor, I'm the guy who's doing the pays and collects, the meeting all the bookmakers. So I think that's a major strength. And another major strength, I believe, is my reputation. Reputation in this business is everything. We're unregulated. I made several big-time deals just on a handshake, and I've always paid everybody when I lost. And that's an important thing, in this business. You got to have a great reputation to have people want to do business with you. When it comes to weaknesses, I really don't have any. No, I'm just joking. Weaknesses, I think weaknesses for us is probably European markets. I really have never gotten into that. A lot of the lines are moving at 3-4 o'clock in the morning our time here. So it's just, I never really got into that. And live betting, I always wanted to get into, but that's one of those things. I know it's massive over in Europe, and it's blowing up here. I just never got into it. And I think if I ever did get into it, it'll probably knock 10 years off my life. So I'm probably going to just pass on it. But I wish that I did get in, that it was prevalent when I was coming up, but it just wasn't around, 15, 20 years ago. So
your approach and process to betting sports, you sort of said you started out with scalping and arbitrage and even middling.
Yes.
Has that sort of changed or evolved over the years as the market's changed?
Yeah, absolutely. We're still, listen, I'm always going to be middling games. Now the different things, I'm able to have enough of a bankroll where I'm actually willing to gamble a decent amount on games. But middling and scalping was my number one thing to try to build my bankroll up. And that's when it started. I needed to middle and scalp games where my risk was as close to zero as possible. I don't even remember having a losing month back then. I was just printing money. The numbers were just always, the math would always add up, and I didn't have to sweat a game. I didn't watch games. It was completely different than your typical sports bettor or sports book. I never watched the game. I wasn't into that. Once the game started, my work was done. Yeah, that's always been a big thing. Now, even today, I don't really watch games. I barely even know two players on a team. You know what I mean? I everything is based on the line and the spread and what each line is worth and what our numbers. We have our own guys that they'll tell us, they'll tell us what a line should be, and then it's all based on what that number is versus the market. These guys might know all the my guys that work for me will know what what the players are and what this means. I came up not having to know any of that. I just knew what every half point was worth and how I could just move lines around and search for lines, manipulate more. And there's so much shit, man. I mean, I could go into details for hours and hours, but it's it's a lot of stuff going on.
So when you mentioned you have a team there. When someone joins the team, is there something that you try and teach them, or is there something you look for, or what's some of the first things you do when someone, day one of their job with you, whatever that might be? Do you sit them down and teach them bankroll management, or what a half point in the NFL means on 3 and on 7 and on 14, or what is it like?
Yeah, it all depends. If I'm going to have a trader that's in my office, he's gonna want to know a little bit of sports. He's gonna want to know what all the half points are worth and stuff. But if I'm going to have a quant guy that's going to be doing a lot of handicapping, they're going to also want to know that stuff too. But sometimes it's better to not bring in the baggage knowledge that especially for a trader. I don't want you to think that for a trader. I want you to come in mostly knowing nothing and let me show you exactly what it is. If I say, okay, we make this game 6, and then you could disagree with me and you could just say, oh yeah, but Tom Brady's not what he once was. Everything's quantified. Unless you could quantify something for us, it's not something that I really need to hear, especially from a new guy coming in. That's why I have my quants and I have my guys making the numbers for me. So I don't, for a trader coming in, I kind of don't want them knowing too much about sports. Quants, they could know, or they do know a lot of the stuff, but again, it's all based on data. Everything's data, so it's different depending on the role.
Yeah. Okay. And is there any room for intuition or subjective analysis, coming up with a number, or is it 100% purely analytical and data driven?
That all depends. I like to just be, I'd like to go on autopilot if it was my choice. Of course, that's not that, it's a model can never be perfect if it's completely data driven. There's always something there that's subjective and then that's, unquantifiable, or that you can't just put your hand on it. So yeah, there's definitely intuition there. That's what separates the good from the great, I guess. And it all depends on the sport and whatnot. And, I don't really want to plant ideas into people's heads and kind of, reveal too much. But yeah, me personally, I like the pure quantitative approach, but there's more to it. There's still more to it than that.
So I have a weird random question for you. Teasers. I grew up in Australia. There's no such thing as teasers. I've lived in Europe, Caribbean, and now in the US. But teasers are a massive part of US culture when it comes to NFL, especially. Do you know how they came about and what the reason for teasers is?
I don't know what the reason. I don't know and I don't know the history. I remember there used to be teasers, and I remember there was another thing called pleasers, where you would actually give points instead of get points. And I remember there was another thing called action points, where every half point that you kind of beat the spread by, and bookmakers stopped taking that a while ago, would be more money in your pocket. So, I don't know what the history of it was. You're right, on the key numbers with the teasers, that's definitely a positive EV thing that a lot of people, I know Stanford Wong in his book, which was, at the time was aha thing when he published his book, Sharp Sports Betting, I think it was called. That was like a big thing, just these NFL teasers. But the history of it, I can't really comment on that.
So you mentioned you have a very strong quantitative approach. What about bankroll management? How critical is it for you and your operation to make sure that, you mentioned earlier, discipline is a core tenet? Is that the most important thing?
Yes. Coming up, bankroll management was everything. Your bankroll is very important. Right now I'm at a point in which, I don't think the market really can handle this. I can handle the swings of the market's not big enough for me to, at least the college markets, which is where we make most of our money at, it's not big enough really to kind of affect my bankroll, so to speak. NFL is a different story. NFL is a pretty big market for us, but yeah, bankroll is a big thing, and anybody coming up in a business would always be wise to adhere to bankroll management. It's very important.
So let's talk about the US now. You've obviously been doing it for a long time, much longer than most here. What happened when the Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act on May 14th, 2018? Did that have a fundamental change from day to day to your business? Did it have a minimal impact? What was the sense in your office or wherever you were on that day?
All honesty, it didn't change anything. Business as usual for us. You know what I mean? We're I don't know of any professional, and I'm in touch with several professionals in the business that rely on, just the Las Vegas market, or that just bet exclusively in Las Vegas. The Las Vegas market, compared to the offshore market, is just it's nothing. It's a drop in a bucket. Anybody that's betting U.S. sports professionally is betting offshore, because that's the way you can get down. You just need as many different ways to be able to bet as much as possible if you have that edge. The United States market, hopefully one day it will change, but as of now, I don't think it could accommodate. It could exclusively accommodate someone doing this as a professional.
So a lot of people who follow you on Twitter would have seen a couple of videos that you've posted. For those that haven't, they should go and check them out. And from your perspective, just take us through your experience so far in this newly regulated market.
Right now, in this day and age, back then when I was coming up, there was 100 different bookmakers, all at their own lines, and everybody was competing. Like I said, in this day and age now, there's 10 or 12 bookmakers, 10 or 12 different line sets. Right now, we're in the offshore markets. We're called the per head era, where guys are just there's bookmakers are not really in Costa Rica or offshore. They're not really booking out of Costa Rica. Everything is just data centers that are actually moving numbers, that are answering phone calls for guys that are trying to run their business from the United States. And that's what's happening. So the lines are all vanilla lines. Everyone's copying each other's lines. There's nobody wants to be unique. Nobody, wants to go out there. Nobody, back then everybody thought they were the best bookmaker in the world. Now it's just, let me just have this guy's write my business. And for me, it kind of hurts me in essence, because I used to love being able to shop around and look for different numbers. By the same token, having 10 or 12 different line sets, it gives me room to manipulate markets pretty easily and just make, at my whim, I could just make any number move. It cost me $500, $1,000, and I could turn the whole screen black, as they say. And so which it's not it got fun in the beginning, but it's just so dry now. You know what I mean? It's not what it used to be. I remember down in Costa Rica when I first visited there, one of the major bookmakers that was there, a guy by the name of Mr. Green. He was a big bookmaker, one of the most well-respected guys, and he invited me to his office, and I was just sitting there. I'd see the bets coming in, and all the clerks were there. This is when, phone betting was the primary type of betting. It wasn't all internet. Internet was the minority, and the phone was the majority. And then now soon that flip-flopped. But back then, clerks were coming in, and he would see the bets coming in, and, a guy would come in, say on the Yankees-Toronto game, and some guy would bet 5,000. And he would move the line. He was dealing a dime line. Let's just say the line was pick 'em both ways, -05. He will move the line -11, 6 cents on a $5,000 bet. And then another guy would come in, bet him 100,000 on a different game. Let's say on KC Baltimore. And let's say the line was also pick 'em. And I remember him, puffing his cigar and taking a puff. And I was thinking, my God, it's a $100,000 bet. He's probably going to move this line 9 cents. You know what I mean? The most you could move it is going to go to -14. And he would just say, make KC -07. And I was like, holy shit, this is just it was crazy. And I'm just looking at him. He would puff his cigar, and he knew his customers. He knew how to manage risk, and he knew to move heavy on certain people. And, the money, it just wasn't purely based on the amount. It was the customer coupled with the amount. It was just a real bookmaker. And seeing that, I was in awe. And, it was just, it was unbelievable to witness that, and it always stuck with me on the era of how bookmaking was and how real bookmakers existed, and how it was, it was respected. And now we're in an era where if somebody has any idea of what they're doing, they're getting chased. It's just it's sad. Guys like William Hill, all these European sports books, are unable to handle, risk effectively without having to resort to the extreme measure, of banning winners. And it sucks. It sucks for not just me. Of course, my interests are self-serving. Obviously, I want places to play into, but it sucks for anybody else, because despite how the markets are all obviously becoming more efficient, players are getting smarter as well, and then players are finding ways to win. There's going to be players that are going to be able to win and overcome that 52.38% to be able to cross over that threshold and make money at this. For the United States to be filled with a market that completely bans winners, like it does in Europe, is just, it's un-American. It's not right. Why should you be punished for being good at what you do? It's just, you know what I mean? Why can't these bookmakers find a way to use this information just like Mr. Green did? He would use this information accordingly and adjust his lines accordingly. Why can't that happen today? I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. I wish it would. And do I have a solution for it? Hey, I have, there's different, I'm not a bookmaker, so I can't, I'm just a bettor. So I don't know. I just wish bookmakers existed anymore. I wish they existed. They don't exist anymore.
Are there just none that exist, and they all have the same sort of risk management style that you've encountered so far, or do you think it could change at all in the future?
There's still some. There's definitely, when I say none exist, I'm talking about in general, the majority. There's always, there's still your industry leaders offshore. They're still always going to be there. The bookmaker.eus of the world and the Pinnacles and these guys, but those are few and far in between. There's very little left. Las Vegas, at a time before William Hill kind of took over, you had a lot of places that would book bets, Cal Neva, Leroy's, Lucky's. These guys had guys that knew what they were doing, and they were bookmakers from a long time. They would book bets, and, when William Hill kind of combined those guys and then just took over everything and didn't tolerate any winners or anything sharp, it's just a trend that sucks to see happening. Even David Purdom published in his ESPN, in his article, one of his articles, saying that William Hill has a meeting every Wednesday just to find out who they're going to kick out. It's sad, you know what I mean? Like, and again, I'm not trying to tell anybody how to run their business. That's the way they run their business. They're very successful. God bless them. But at the same time, it's sad for just us, for players, that there's guys that I'm pretty sure that they banned, that they probably they thought they were winners, but they completely classified them incorrectly. And they were actually losing long-term players, but they just said, heck with it. It's better safe than sorry. Get rid of them. Because nobody knows about that. And that's what I tried to do. I kind of wanted to let the public understand that, shit like this exists, and guys are going to boot you if you win. It's not, it's an underground thing. People, whenever you'd hear somebody, I got kicked out of William Hill, and they're by the thousands. People say, yeah, whatever, yeah, right, you're probably just trying to self-promote your tout service, or you're probably just, nobody would believe you. So, me having it on video, and I have nothing, I'm not self-promoting anything, I don't have a tout service, I don't sell picks, I don't do any of that. I'm just trying to change the landscape, so maybe one day my kid could run my business and, not have to be filled with William Hills all over the United States, and instead have Mr. Greens out there that know how to book, that can book and effectively without having, to ban players. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, no, that's, I'm sure, many listeners as well. So tell me what part Las Vegas played, if at all, throughout the time you've been doing it. Would you regularly go out there? Have you got sort of friends and acquaintances and colleagues or whatnot that are located there? Was it a major component, or was it not that big a part for you?
Vegas was a big part back in 2010, 2011, 2012. I had a lot of, I had guys in different sports books out there. The big one was Cantor Technology, Cantor Gaming, which has now changed their name. But that was a big part of it. They used to book big time bets with us. They were taking 40,000 on college football sides on a Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, which is 8:30 a.m. Vegas time, and that's unheard of. That'll never happen again. I don't know if anybody will book that kind of number, 40,000 on a Tuesday for a Saturday game. They were, they were bookmakers, and came, and it just sucks. I was involved with something with them, and there's some legal issues, which is in a whole podcast by itself, probably, which we could address one other day. But these guys were doing the best they could to try to hold a smaller percentage on a lot more money, and they had the right idea. They've run into now. It's just once the main guy there, Mike Colbert, who was running the show, once he got into the legal issue, then it just got to the point in which I believe it fell downhill from what people are telling me. That they're moving on air, using people as line services. So if I'm trying to bet a game -5, they put you on a spin out delay, and it's everything subject to approval. So they'll probably check the market, and they'll say, "Oh shit, the market's going to 6. Hell with it. Why should we give him the bet? Let's just make it 5.5, and maybe he'll just bite on that." And that's what's happening. They're using sharp players as a line service. It happens all over. It happens all over the offshore world, and it's now happening in Vegas with these apps, from what I understand and what people are telling me, and it sucks. You know what I mean? It's guys are not booking anymore. They're just the whole landscape has changed completely. Bookmakers don't exist. Everybody just wants to, they only want to book a game from a guy. If the world is painted 6 and they're dealing a 6.5, they just want the guy to lay the 6.5. Taking a 6.5 is taboo. No, you can't do that. It's crazy. Nobody knows how to. And again, I'm just speaking for myself. Okay, people might think that. And again, I'm not a bookmaker, but from what I see from this side of the counter, nobody can take a bet. Nobody books a bet anymore. It's hard to find them. And if there is somebody out there that can book a bet, please let me know, because I'd love to be a customer.
When sports bettors come up to you and ask for advice, or aspiring younger people that might want to get into the field, what type of advice do you have for them?
If somebody wants to come into the business now, I would tell them don't, honestly. Given the landscape and everything, it's changed from when I first started. It's very hard. But if somebody says, man, I really believe I could win, I back tested my models, and I've done this, I've done that, I have a lot of different accounts I get down in, and I got some weak numbers and blah, 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 then I would just reach out to me and we could do something together. What you got to do is, you can't get lazy. You got to find a way. I remember a famous quote by Michael Jordan. Some people want it to happen, some people wish it to happen, and others make it happen. You know what I mean? You got to just, if you really believe in yourself and you really want to do it, you got to just go for it and just do it and try to be the best you can be. Just like me, I had so many people telling me I was crazy, and to be a pro gambler, I guess it's more accepted today than it was, 17, 18 years ago. But it's still, at the same time, amongst an older generation, it's still like, you're going to be a professional gambler. It's crazy. But you know what? If you really believe in it, go for it. Nobody's going to stop you. The only person who can stop you is yourself. You got to believe in yourself, and you can't rest on your laurels. You know what I mean? Don't, if you have one successful day, one successful week, one successful month, that's great, but it doesn't help tomorrow. You got to find a way to keep getting better, keep getting better. I remember another quote. Babe Ruth once said, "Yesterday's home runs don't win today's games." If I can remember it, something like that. Yesterday's home runs it's just, you can't worry about yesterday. You got to keep looking forward, keep trying to get better. And if you keep working at it, you can be successful.
What takes your fancy when you're sort of trying to find interesting content, whether it is books or articles or anything else?
Well, a lot of the books I read, just for regular casino gambling, advantage play, there's a book, a famous book, James Grosjean, Beyond Counting. It's Exhibit CAA. It's a very expensive book, but there's a lot of gems in there. Advanced Advantage Play, that's another great book by Elliot Jacobson. Just trying to remember a few more. Conquering Risk I like. Scorecasting, super forecasting, sharp sports betting, which is a classic. Stanford Wong, we mentioned that. And when it comes to maybe gambling law, I always I'm interested in Professor Nelson Rose. His website's gamblingandthelaw.com. I'm a proud client of Professor Rose, and he always does like a monthly column. And he also made a book, Internet Gambling Law, way back when. But there's so many books to choose from, but those are some of my favorites just off the top of my head.
So I got to ask you, you must have a fun Vegas story. You must have just a general gambling or betting story that you have from all the years. I'm sure that there's probably a 50 or 100, but if you have one that stands out that you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I used to have runners in Vegas, in a lot of the casinos, and a lot of them would get kicked out here and there and stuff, and a lot of my runners were like older gentlemen. So I had this one guy, his name was Jay. He was an old Jewish guy, real nice guy, very honorable as the day's long. And he was in the stratosphere. He was betting, and they had some pretty off numbers. This is probably a decade ago. And he was betting there. All of a sudden, he calls me up and he tells me, he goes, I've been carried out of the stratosphere. And I'm like, whoa, Jay, relax. He's calling me up in a panic, huffing and puffing. I'm like, he's a 75-year-old guy, 75. What are you talking about, Jay? What happened? He goes, I was carried out of the stratosphere. And I'm like, what do you mean carried out? You were escorted out? No, I was carried out. I'm like, what do you mean carried out? He goes, they had one guy on each arm and they carried me out. I'm like, they just walked out with you. And he goes, no, my feet were off the floor. I was carried out. And I was like, holy shit. We're probably betting a dime or 2 dimes a game, nothing crazy. And he was carried out. And this is a decade ago. And it's funny because, you think that, a lot of people say offshore gambling, there's organized crime and all this. And look what happens in a regulated Las Vegas Strip casino where guys are just getting roughed up. A 75-year-old guy. All you have to do was just ask him to leave. He wasn't going to fight you. And he was physically, you can't make this shit up. He was physically carried out, one guy on each arm, physically lifting him out and, taking him to the door. So that was probably the craziest boot story where we got booted from a place that I've ever experienced.
Yeah, that's very funny. I'm sure there's a million others that are.
Yeah, there's a lot more.
Way.
Not too many could top that one though. That's that one. And this guy was such a nice guy. You know what I mean? You get him a hot pastrami on Ryan at Knish, he's in heaven. He doesn't, very easy going guy. But man, he got roughed up and you kind of these guys are retired. They just do this, making a little extra money on the side. But he earned his pay that day.
Recently in the U.S., there was a story that was probably very normal for many people who are listening to this. But one punter was betting live just before a field goal attempt at the end of an NFL game and placed an in-game live wager on, I think it was the Broncos against the Raiders, and he got 750 to 1 or something like that, or 7,500 to 1 instead, and the bet, instead of being relatively small, ended up being an 82,000 payout. And I think FanDuel was the book, said, yeah, we're not paying you out as a palpable error, relatively normal thing. And he said, no, I want my money. And they offered him a much smaller amount and some box seats to a Giants game. And he said, no, I want my money. And then it went on for a few days, and there was a lot of hysteria in the media. And then eventually, this guy got his money. I'm curious to get your thoughts and perspective on this story.
Yeah, it's it wasn't just him too. I think other guys also caught it. It wasn't just the one guy had 82,000. I think it was total maybe 150,000 total was paid out. So there was a few guys that got in on this. It's one of those things in which there's two sides of the coin. One guys will say, a bet's a bet. You can't take it back. Whatever's written. And then another one will say, listen, it's an obvious error, and common sense should prevail. And I'm probably of the latter thought, where that's obviously, and it's an obvious bad line. It was a 6-1 favorite. The guy's getting 750 to 1. So at the same time, and I think doing something like that and setting a precedent like that on such a big juice error is not going to be good long term, because the casinos can never do that forever. Plus 750 to 1, okay, it cost 80K. If it was plus 7,500 to 1, now we're at 800,000, and then it keeps going on and on into the millions, God forbid. And then of course, but if you set a precedent saying, hey, you paid it last time, why not pay it this time? I don't know. it's one of those things in which, like, if you have a spread or somebody's a 10-point favorite and you get plus 10 on them, okay, the casino's risk there is they're just going to lose that one unit, that one bet, and they'll just pay it out. They'll never hear about that. But this one was a little bit crazy because, $100 to turn into 80,000, that's a lottery hit. I don't like the precedent that sets. I think that that there should be detailed regulation, detailed rules on how issues like this are handled. I don't think that the sports book should say what the correct odds were, because that's too subjective. And I think that they could decide whatever the quote unquote correct odds are. Who the hell are they to say what the correct odds are? It's not after the fact. Once the game starts, whatever the odds are, the odds are. But I think there should be a panel or maybe several sports books where you kind of get a consensus line and pay off on that line, and then somehow punish the sports book for the infraction. You can't just, there has to be a punishment where you pay the guy X times the amount bet or something. I'm just speaking off the top of my head what I think. I don't know what the regulation is. But you don't want the sportsbook to go bankrupt, but you don't want the sportsbook to cry bad line all the time. So it's got to be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's just one of the many issues to come for the newly regulated market in the US. So I guess we'll see more and more of these unique cases popping up and being handled each time. So did you make the right call leaving Deutsche Bank with a nice salary and a nice office job, or do you think if you had your time again, you might choose the office?
Given how everything worked out, I wouldn't change anything. I think I did make the right call. I have no regrets. It was a good run, and it's not like I'm retiring or anything like that. But I spent, back then I was working 100 hours a week. I didn't take a day off really, and I wasn't winning any Husband of the Year awards. I wasn't winning any Father of the Year awards. So now I kind of let my guys do most of the stuff, and I'm kind of trying to sit back a little bit and kind of enjoy it. Enjoy life, and I want to work to live, not live to work type thing.
Before I let you go, I just want to confirm the best way to follow you is at Spanky Sports on Twitter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. Reach out to me, Spanky Sports. This time of year I don't tweet as much, but I still try to find a way to do it every now and again. I'm so busy with the sports, and I'm just trying to. Every Monday is a headache. We're getting kicked out of so many places all the time, and I'm trying to get different places to play into. It's a revolving door. You just got to keep the number of places to bet into alive. And it's that's the hard part. The winning has become the easy part. It's finding a place to get down. That's become the challenge, and that's what it always is now.
Certainly, very much appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Jake, man, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.